Colorado Territory, 1873. The late autumn wind swept down from the jagged peaks of the Rockies, carrying with it the scent of pine and the promise of an early winter. The small settlement of Willow Creek huddled against the approaching cold, its wooden buildings weathered by years of frontier life. Asher Sullivan believed the untamed West was no place for tenderness. At 26, he'd already seen how quickly the frontier could strip a man of everything he held dear. The harsh reality of survival had taught him that caring too deeply was a luxury afforded only to those in the safety of eastern cities. Out here, attachment was weakness, and weakness got you killed. You planning to stand there all day? Thomas Miller called from the mercantile porch, his voice cutting through Asher's thoughts. Asher adjusted his worn leather vest and patted the neck of his chestnut gelding. Just thinking, Tom. Winter's coming. Might need to bring the herd down earlier this year. Working as foreman for the Circle M Ranch gave Asher purpose, even if it meant keeping everyone at arm's length. He'd crafted his solitude carefully, built walls higher than the mountain passes. What he wanted, what he convinced himself he wanted, was simple: survive another season, build up his savings, maybe someday claim a piece of land far from anyone who might become a liability to his heart. Deep down, in the quiet moments when the campfire burned low and the prairie stretched endless beneath the stars, a different truth whispered to him. The ache of loneliness felt heaviest then, when there was no one to share the beauty of this wild country. But Asher had buried that yearning alongside the memories of his family lost to typhoid 5 years ago. Better to be alone than to watch helplessly as the frontier claimed someone else you loved. What Asher couldn't know as he rode through Willow Creek that crisp October morning was that his carefully constructed solitude was about to face its greatest challenge. The stagecoach arrived in a cloud of dust, 2 days late, and showing signs of hard travel. Asher watched from across the street as passengers emerged, stretching stiff limbs and looking around with the wary expressions of travelers who'd endured the rigors of the trail. Among them stepped a young woman whose appearance immediately set her apart from the rough-hewn settlement. She wore a travel-worn but clearly fine blue dress, the color of summer skies, with practical brown boots peeking beneath the hem. Her honey-blonde hair was partly escaped from its pins, framing a face that even exhaustion couldn't diminish. She couldn't have been more than 22, but there was a determined set to her jaw that spoke of someone who knew her own mind. Miss Sophia Vance, the stagecoach driver announced, handing down a small trunk. Your destination, as requested. Asher felt something stir within him. Curiosity, perhaps, or simple appreciation for beauty so unexpected in this remote place. He quickly quashed the feeling. Easterners like her rarely lasted through a single Western winter. She'd either marry the first stable prospect or catch the next coach back to civilization. He turned away, intent on finishing his business in town before heading back to the ranch. The coming days would bring cattle to move, supplies to secure, men to organize. No time for distractions. But fate had other plans for Asher Sullivan. 2 days later, as he rode along the creek that gave the settlement its name, gunshots echoed from the direction of the old Johnston homestead. Asher reined his horse sharply, instinctively dropping his hand to his colt. The Johnston place had been abandoned since the spring, when the family gave up and returned east. Nobody should be there. More shots rang out, followed by shouting. Asher hesitated only briefly before spurring his horse toward the commotion. Whatever his philosophy about keeping to himself, he couldn't ignore someone potentially in danger. As he crested the small rise overlooking the homestead, he saw them. 3 riders circling a figure who stood defiantly in front of the cabin door, a shotgun raised. Even from this distance, Asher recognized the blue dress and honey-blonde hair. The woman, Sophia Vance, fired a warning shot skyward as one rider approached too closely. Her stance was determined but unpracticed. Against 3 men, she wouldn't stand a chance if they decided to rush her. This land is legally mine, her voice carried across the distance. I have the deed and bill of sale. Ain't no place for a woman alone, one rider called back. Johnston sold to us before he left. You've been swindled, miss. Asher knew that was a lie. Johnston had tried to sell for months with no takers. Without fully considering the consequences, Asher rode forward, making himself visible on the ridge before descending toward the standoff. The men turned at his approach, hands hovering near their weapons. 3 against 1 doesn't seem sporting, Asher called, keeping his voice casual while his eyes assessed each man carefully. Drifters, by the look of them. Opportunists rather than hardened outlaws. This ain't your concern, Sullivan, the lead writer said, recognizing him. Miss Vance is right about the deed, Asher replied. Johnston left without selling. So unless you've got paperwork saying otherwise, I believe the lady has the rightful claim. The standoff stretched into tense silence before the leader spat on the ground. Ain't worth dying over. Not yet, anyway. He jerked his head at his companions, and they wheeled their horses around, riding off with backward glances that promised this wasn't over. When they disappeared over the rise, Sophia Vance lowered the shotgun, her hands trembling slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice steadier than her hands. "Though I had it under control." Asher dismounted, keeping a respectful distance. "They'll be back, Miss Vance. Men like that don't give up easily." "Then I'll be ready." She straightened, chin lifted. "I didn't come 2,000 miles to be intimidated off my own property." Something in her determination struck Asher. Most women who came west did so with husbands or fathers, not alone with nothing but a shotgun and a deed. "May I ask why you're here?" "This is rough country for anyone, especially a woman alone." She finished his sentence with a spark in her green eyes. "My father died last spring. The war took everything else. This homestead was my last option, Mr. Sullivan." For the first time in years, Asher felt something crack in the walls he'd built. Here was someone who understood loss, who faced the frontier not from naivety, but necessity. It unsettled him. "You need help getting this place habitable before winter," he said, glancing at the dilapidated cabin. "The roof won't hold against snow." "Are you offering?" she asked, surprise evident in her expression. Asher should have said no. He should have wished her luck and ridden away. Instead, he heard himself say, "The ranch can spare me on Sundays. I'll bring tools." That single decision, born of unexpected compassion or perhaps something deeper he refused to acknowledge, became the moment that would forever divide Asher Sullivan's life into before and after. True to his word, Asher returned that Sunday with tools, lumber, and supplies. He found Sophia had already begun clearing debris and had somehow managed to patch part of the roof herself, though her inexperienced work wouldn't withstand the first heavy snow. "You've been busy," he commented, eyeing the neat stacks of salvaged wood and the cleared yard. "I don't believe in waiting for rescue, Mr. Sullivan," she replied, pushing a stray lock of honey-blonde hair from her face. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms already showing the marks of manual labor. "Asher," he said, "if we're going to rebuild a roof together, you might as well use my name." "Sophia," she offered in return, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her transforming her face. They worked side by side through the day, Asher teaching and Sophia learning with remarkable quickness. He found himself impressed by her resilience and willingness to attempt any task, no matter how challenging. "Where did you learn all this?" she asked as they took a brief rest, sharing water from his canteen. "My father was a carpenter before we came west," Asher replied, the words coming easier than he expected. "He believed a man should know how to build what he needs." "And what happened to him?" Her question was gentle, recognizing the past tense. Asher stared at the horizon. "Typhoid. Took him, my mother, and my sister in the span of 2 weeks. 5 years ago." Sophia was quiet for a moment. "The war took my brothers. Fever took my mother long before. Then my father's heart gave out last spring. I understand being the last one standing, Asher. It hollows you out." The simple truth of her words struck him deeply. She did understand, not just loss, but the particular loneliness of being the survivor. For the first time in years, Asher felt seen in a way that was both terrifying and oddly comforting. As autumn deepened, those Sunday visits became the rhythm of their lives. Each week brought visible progress to the homestead and invisible changes to Asher's carefully guarded heart. Despite his intentions to maintain distance, he found himself looking forward to their conversations as much as the work they accomplished. Sophia proved to be not just determined but intelligent and thoughtful. She had brought books with her, precious weight in a journey where every ounce mattered, and sometimes read aloud while they ate the simple meal she prepared. Her vision for the homestead went beyond survival. She spoke of orchards and gardens, of creating beauty in this harsh place. "Why do you stay out here?" she asked him one Sunday as they shingled the last section of roof. You have skills that would serve you well in any city. The question caught Asher off guard. I suppose the same reason as you. Starting over. No, Sophia shook her head. I came because I had nowhere else. You stay because something in you loves this wild country, despite everything it's taken from you. Her perception unsettled him. He'd never articulated that contradiction even to himself. How he both resented and loved the frontier that had orphaned him. The West doesn't care if you love it, he replied, hammering a shingle with more force than necessary. It takes, and sentiment just makes the loss harder. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. Perhaps facing loss without sentiment leaves you with nothing at all. Her words haunted Asher as he rode back to the ranch that evening. For years, he'd convinced himself that emotional detachment was strength. But watching Sophia plant flower seeds alongside practical vegetables, seeing how she refused to surrender beauty even in the face of harsh practicality, made him wonder what he'd sacrificed in his determination to feel nothing. The first heavy snow came in late November, earlier than usual. Asher rode out to the homestead immediately, concerned for Sophia's safety. He found her cheerfully stoking the repaired stone fireplace, the cabin snug against the storm. I was worried, he admitted, stomping snow from his boots. About me or your roof work? She teased, offering him coffee. Both, he replied with a rare smile. But the roof seems to be holding. They sat before the fire as the storm howled outside, talking late into the evening. For the first time, Asher found himself sharing stories of his family, not just how they died, but how they lived. The memories he'd kept locked away for years flowed more freely than he could have imagined. You should stay until the storm passes, Sophia said as darkness fell. The spare room is habitable now, thanks to you. Propriety demanded he refuse, but the blizzard made travel dangerous. Thank you, he said simply. That night, lying in the narrow bed listening to the wind, Asher faced an uncomfortable truth. In helping Sophia build her haven, he'd begun dismantling the walls around his own heart. The realization terrified him. Caring meant vulnerability. Vulnerability invited devastation. By December, the homestead had transformed. Though still modest, it now stood weather-tight and warm, with supplies enough to see Sophia through the winter. Asher had no excuse to continue his weekly visits, yet he couldn't bring himself to stop. Word had spread through the settlement about the Eastern woman making a go of it alone, and about Asher Sullivan's regular presence at her homestead. Gossip was inevitable in small communities, but Asher found himself uncharacteristically unconcerned with others' opinions. What did concern him were the continued reports of the three men who had threatened Sophia. They'd been seen in the area, asking questions about the Johnston place and its new occupant. Asher began carrying extra ammunition and varying his routes to the homestead, vigilance becoming second nature. You've become quite the topic of conversation, Thomas Miller commented one day as Asher purchased supplies at the mercantile. People should mind their business, Asher replied, counting out coins. Can't blame folks for being interested. You've spent years keeping to yourself. Then suddenly you're rebuilding a homestead for the prettiest woman to step off a stagecoach in these parts. Asher's jaw tightened. Miss Vance needed help. That's all. Thomas raised an eyebrow. If you say so. But winter's a lonely time. Might be nice to have someone waiting at home. The comment struck closer to truth than Asher cared to admit. Each time he left Sophia's homestead, the ride back to his Spartan cabin at the ranch felt longer, the silence there more profound. The Christmas season brought unexpected joy when Sophia invited Asher to share the holiday with her. She decorated the cabin with pine boughs and handmade ornaments, baked bread with precious dried fruit, and even presented him with a gift, a finely crafted leather journal. For your thoughts, she said softly. You keep too much locked inside. Embarrassed that he had nothing prepared in return, Asher impulsively removed the silver watch that had belonged to his father, his most treasured possession. This was my father's, he said, placing it in her palm. He always said time was the most valuable thing we can give someone. Sophia's eyes widened. Asher, I can't accept this. It's too precious. Please, he said, closing her fingers around it. It should be used, not hidden away in my pocket. The moment their hands touched, something shifted between them, a current of understanding that went beyond words. For a brief, breathtaking moment, Asher allowed himself to imagine a different future than the solitary one he'd resigned himself to. But reality intruded before he could act on that feeling. As they sat by the fire after their meal, gunshots shattered the peace of Christmas evening. Asher was on his feet instantly, extinguishing the lamp while drawing his revolver. "It's them," Sophia whispered, reaching for her shotgun. 3 riders circled the homestead, firing into the air and shouting threats. "Come on out, Sullivan. We know you're in there. Time to settle whether this pretty piece of land belongs to the lady or to men who know what to do with it." "Stay inside," Asher ordered, moving toward the door. Sophia grabbed his arm. "They're drunk and looking for trouble. You go out there, they'll shoot you down." "Better me than both of us trapped in here if they decide to burn us out," he replied grimly. Fear flashed across Sophia's face, but beneath it was something else, a fierce determination. "We defend this place together," she said, checking her shotgun. "It's my home, Asher. Our home, in a way. You helped build it. Our home." The words pierced him more deeply than any bullet could have. This woman had claimed not just land, but a place in his life he'd never intended to offer. Before he could respond, a flaming arrow struck the roof. The men had grown tired of intimidation and moved to destruction. "The roof," Sophia cried. "I'll handle it. Cover me," Asher said, grabbing a blanket and water bucket as he slipped out the back door. What followed was a chaotic exchange of gunfire as Asher climbed to the roof, while Sophia provided covering fire from windows. The men, not expecting organized resistance, retreated to regroup after one took a grazing wound from Sophia's shotgun. Asher managed to extinguish the flames before they spread, but in the process exposed himself to fire. A bullet tore through his left shoulder, the impact nearly sending him sliding off the ice-slick roof. Only desperate clutching at the chimney saved him from a deadly fall. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he made his way back down and into the cabin, where Sophia gasped at the sight of his blood-soaked shirt. "They'll be back with more men," he said, wincing as she helped him remove his shirt to examine the wound. "We need to get you somewhere safe." "I'm not leaving," Sophia stated firmly, cleaning his wound with steady hands. "This is my land. The deed is legal. Running now means running forever." "Sophia," Asher began, then hissed as she probed for the bullet. "Hold still," she instructed. "It went through clean. You're fortunate." As she bandaged him with strips of clean linen, their eyes met. The intensity in her green gaze held him more effectively than any physical restraint. "Why did you really help me, Asher? All these months?" It wasn't just neighborly kindness. The question hung between them, demanding truth he denied even to himself. With his blood staining her hands and danger circling outside, pretense seemed suddenly pointless. "Because you made me remember what it feels like to care if tomorrow comes," he answered hoarsely. "And that terrifies me more than those men out there." Sophia's expression softened. She leaned forward slowly, giving him time to pull away, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle but sure, a promise in the midst of chaos. "Then we have something worth fighting for," she whispered against his lips. That night changed everything. As they prepared for the inevitable return of their attackers, Asher found himself planning not just for immediate survival, but for a future. They barricaded doors, positioned weapons, and sent Sophia's farm dog running with a hastily written note toward town, hoping it might bring help. Dawn brought new determination. Asher knew the attackers would return, likely with reinforcements, expecting to find a wounded man and a frightened woman. Instead, they had used the night to transform the homestead into a defensible position, using every trick Asher had learned in years on the frontier. "Tell me about the orchard you want to plant," Asher said as they waited, watching the horizon from different windows. Sophia glanced at him in surprise. "You're asking about fruit trees now? I want to know what we're fighting for," he replied simply. "Beyond just surviving today." Her smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. "Apple trees along the western ridge. Pear and cherry closer to the house. Peaches if we can get them to take in this climate. We'll need to dig irrigation channels from the creek," Asher added, warming to the vision, "and build a proper barn before getting livestock." "We?" Sophia asked softly. Asher met her gaze steadily. "If you'll have me. Not just for building, Sophia. For everything." Before she could answer, they spotted riders approaching. At least 6 men, more than they had prepared for. Asher's heart sank. Their preparations suddenly seemed woefully inadequate. "Whatever happens," he said urgently, "know that you've given me back something I thought was gone forever. The belief that some things are worth the risk of losing them." Sophia squeezed his hand. "We're not losing anything today." As the riders approached, a surprising sound came from the opposite direction, hoofbeats and voices. Asher looked out to see Thomas Miller leading a group of townsmen toward the homestead. His message had reached town after all. The would-be claim jumpers, seeing themselves suddenly outnumbered, wheeled their horses and fled. Thomas and his men gave chase, determined to drive them well away from the settlement. When the dust cleared, Asher and Sophia stood on their porch, her porch, watching their unexpected salvation disappear over the ridge. "Seems you've made some friends without realizing it," Sophia observed, linking her arm through his uninjured one. Asher shook his head in wonder. "I've spent years convinced that isolation was safety, that people were liabilities rather than assets. And now," she prompted, "now I think I've been wrong about a great many things." The winter passed with Asher dividing his time between ranch duties and the homestead, though everyone knew his heart remained with Sophia even when work took him elsewhere. By February, he had formally resigned his position as foreman to work full-time on developing their property, their shared vision. The 3 men who had attacked them were eventually caught trying similar intimidation at another homestead. Justice in the territory was swift and harsh for such offenses. Spring brought new beginnings. The first fruit trees were planted with help from neighbors who had become friends. A proper barn rose where once there had been only foundation stones. And on a perfect April morning, with wildflowers carpeting the hills, Asher and Sophia were married beneath the blooming wild plum trees. "I never imagined this," Asher confessed as they stood together that evening, watching sunset paint the distant mountains. "For years, I convinced myself that happiness was a risk I couldn't afford to take." Sophia leaned against him, her head fitting perfectly against his shoulder. "The frontier teaches hard lessons about loss, but it also shows us what can be built with determined hands and hopeful hearts. You taught me that," he said, turning to face her. "That walls meant to protect can become prisons. That sometimes the very thing you're most afraid to lose is the thing that makes life worth living." Their homestead grew prosperous over the following years. The orchard flourished. Children's laughter eventually joined the sounds of livestock and the creek's steady flow. The Willow Creek settlement grew into a proper town, with the Sullivan homestead becoming known for its hospitality and beauty, an oasis of grace in the rugged landscape. Years later, when their oldest daughter asked how they had met, Asher would smile at Sophia before answering. "Your mother bought a piece of land sight unseen, then defended it with nothing but courage and a borrowed shotgun. I came to help fix a roof and found the home I never knew I was looking for." And in the telling, the truth remained clear, that in a land where survival often demanded hardness, their greatest strength had come from the courage to remain soft-hearted. That in a place defined by what it could take from you, they had defined themselves by what they built together. For Asher Sullivan, the man who once believed the frontier was no place for tenderness, had discovered that love wasn't a liability in the wild country. It was the very foundation upon which everything worthwhile was built.